So, hello everyone. My name is Becca Desai, and I, on behalf of Faith Communities Go Green, welcome all of you here today. Faith Communities Go Green, or FCGG as we call it, is a collaboration of Green Umbrella and Equation, and we work on creating a more sustainable planet for everyone. We have 4 working groups of Faith Communities Go Green. They are facilities, advocacy, membership, and education and lifestyles. Our facilities working group helps houses of worship in the greater Cincinnati area become greener and help them increase their energy efficiency. The advocacy working group advocates for environmentally sound and fair legislation in our state. The membership working group ensures that all FCGG members have a fulfilling membership experience. And the education lifestyles working group, which is my group and the presenter of today's program, focuses on bringing educational programs to our communities and inspires everyone to consider changing their lifestyles one step at a time towards an eco-friendly life, which helps us build a harmonious relationship with Mother Nature and all its resources. Over the past few years, our Education Lifestyles Working Group has brought you programs, movies, book clubs, all on various topics that educate us on how we can make choices every day that can either help or hurt our environment. Today's program aligns beautifully with all that we have talked about over these past few years with you. The topic of today's program is Untangling Ourselves from the Creeping Web of Plastics. Our guest today is Bob Gedert. His latest book, Untangling Plastics, just got published a few weeks ago. Besides being an author, Bob has been a recycling consultant for 45 years. And with these 45 years of experience, he's been guiding communities towards sustainable materials management. His expertise has been used by several communities across the country. In Texas, Bob served as the Department Director of Austin Resource Recovery, leading the city of Austin, Texas, towards zero waste goals. In California, he served as Chief of Recycling Operations for the city of Fresno, California. He was also the Executive Director of the California Resource Recovery Association and a founding member of both the California Product Stewardship Council and the National Stewardship Action Council. In Indiana, he has served as Chief of Source Reduction and Recycling of the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, and also served on the Board of Directors of the Indiana Recycling Coalition as well. In Ohio, he has served in the leadership team of resource recovery of the Auglaize and Highland counties and the city of Cincinnati, and also served on the board of the Association of Ohio Recyclers. Bob is the former president of the National Recycling Coalition. He has also received some high honors for his work in this field. In 2019, Bob was awarded the Lifetime Recycling Achievement Award from the National Recycling Coalition. In 2024, Bob was selected for inclusion in Marquee Who's Who for expertise in education and waste management. Currently, Bob serves as an adjunct professor at Xavier University in Cincinnati, teaching climate change. He's married to his college sweetheart, Kathy, and his greatest pleasure in life is watching his 3 children and 2 grandchildren make a difference in their communities. He enjoys taking walks in the local parks with his wife. Bob, your life has so far been so rich with such great service to our world. It is our honor to have you here with us today. We,
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
we welcome you to our program and thank you for being here to share some of your knowledge with us today. Bob, before I give the platform to you to talk, I have a few questions which I request if you may address these in your presentation. In your latest book, Untangling Plastics, you say our planet has already been irreversibly damaged by the impact of plastics, and we will never successfully limit climate change if we cannot untangle ourselves from the creeping web of plastics. You mention in your book that our current methods for addressing the issue of plastics have been insufficient and that misguided mindsets have led the movement for sustainability. Please, can you tell us what these misguided mindsets are? And what are your suggested solutions for how we can adopt greener ways of living? There are a lot of people in the world who practice keeping plastic out of their lives as much as possible. But how do we eliminate plastic entirely from our lives? In fact, the main purpose of today's program is to inform our guests about your thoughts on how we can successfully phase out plastic from our lives. We'd love to hear from you and learn today the step-by-step plans to phase plastics out of society and also learn what are your suggested actionable strategies and resources which can help us all to slow down the effects of environmental destruction through our irresponsible actions. I hand it over to you now, Bob, to address these questions and share your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Becca. Generous introduction. And I welcome everybody that's on this webinar. As we dive in to this topic of plastics. And it is the most confusing of the recycling world to determine what can I recycle in the world of plastics. And I'd like to address that a little bit in this PowerPoint, in this presentation. I want to start out with Becca's question on misguided mindsets. And I have 3 points that I want you to keep in the back of your mind as I walk through this PowerPoint. The first misguided mindset that I wish to note is plastics do not decompose in landfills. And we've read about that in the past, and that's a plastic industry myth that doesn't work. We cannot decompose plastics in a landfill. It's not the proper place for plastics. And second misguided mindset is the triangle coating on plastics. That was designed by the plastics industry and not the recycling world. And it does not indicate that it's recyclable. It is simply a promotion of the 7 different basic types of plastic resins, but it does not aid the recycling industry on what is recyclable and what isn't, and therefore confuses consumers like you. And so there, I label that a misguided mindset there. And the third one to consider as I walk through this PowerPoint is plastic pollution cannot be addressed through increased recycling. And I'll address that in multiple ways on the impact of plastics on the environment, the impact of plastics on climate change, and the impact of plastics on human health. And given those impacts, we can't recycle our way out of this problem. So I begin, there we go. the traditional plastic issues that you encounter every week as you try to recycle. And that is that recycling varies from town to town and even differ where you work, live, play, and in your community. That's very confusing what the recycling standards are. I'm going to speak mostly to plastics in this presentation. I believe that recycling works except for plastics. And that's my point in this PowerPoint. Some locations around the country may have an expanded list of recyclable plastics, while others may restrict plastics and have an expanded list of other recyclables. So it does confuse you as you move from community to community. If you move from, say, Los Angeles, California to Cincinnati, Ohio, completely different list of recyclables, completely. And finally, on this slide, the labels on the containers are very inconsistent and confusing, and they cause contamination. It is an act of greenwashing that industry and corporations have in labeling their containers recyclable when they really aren't. And that causes additional confusion. What is missing in that conversation that we generally have on plastics is the climate connection. The fossil fuel production and its use impact the climate significantly. And the Earth is warming very fast and passing certain tipping points that need our attention. A few years ago, when I was teaching climate change at Xavier, I would say in the future we will reach certain tipping points. Today, I'm saying that we are reaching tipping points around this world because of the warming of the Earth. And 2024 was the warmest year on record, according to meteorologists. To return to a habitable future Earth, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, states we need to go to zero use of fossil fuels. And zero really means no production of fossil fuels, zero. Keep it in the earth and not extract it. For a safe Earth, we need to stop producing and using coal, gas, and oil products that create carbon dioxide and methane emissions. And my main point there is that Earth is our common home, a gift from our Creator. We need to respect it. And what does this climate impact by fossil fuels have anything to do with plastics? It's because all forms of synthetic plastics are made from fossil fuels. If we need to phase out fossil fuels, we also need to phase out plastics made from fossil fuels to reduce climate change impacts. From the extraction and minerals and gas to transport to processing and refining to the manufacturing of plastics, they all impact the Earth. From the entire life cycle of the creation of plastics. In every step, there are carbon dioxide and methane emissions directly impacting the climate. So continuing on that theme, there are significant climate impacts in the extraction, production, packaging, transportation, disposal of plastic products, and plastic packaging, every step along the way. And plastics climate impact is 2 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions in 2019 and has grown significantly since then. That's the latest statistic that I could find. From the creation of plastics through their lifespan, there are continuous environmental and human impacts that are unmitigated as we utilize plastics in our environment. Plastics impacts the humans, the environment, and the climate. Diving into human health issues, and I've got a large section of my book that talks about this issue here. Plastics are formed from frack gas or drilled oil. Approximately 12% of drilled oil is made into plastics. Approximately 25% of frack gas is made into plastics. And fracking is very dear to our hearts as they drill and frack gas in Ohio state parks and around our state. Both fracking gas and drilling oil releases toxic air contaminants hazardous to the local communities around them. But it also it creates health effects directly on our bodies, including respiratory and neurological problems, cardiovascular damage, endocrine disruption, congenital disabilities, cancer, and premature mortality. In years past, these were listed as correlations. In the last 2 years, these health effects are now causal effects that science has advanced to determine that plastics do cause these health effects in a causal direction. Um, Plastics are not simply made of oil or gas. They have chemical additives, sometimes labeled plasticizers. And these plasticizers are there to form the plastic for the use that we desire it to be, the flexibility or inflexibility of the plastic, whether it can contain liquids and food, whether it is stable enough to be a car bumper. There are many different forms of plastics out there, and the industry utilizes 16,000 different chemical additives, which includes 4,400 harmful toxic chemicals that are identified by the US EPA as toxic to human life. Petrochemical additives can cause nervous system disorders, reproductive impairments, developmental problems, cancer, and genetic impacts. So we're not just talking about the impact of plastics, we're talking about the impact of chemical additives added to plastics that impact human health. And these conditions result from breathing in off gases, ingestion of plastic particles, and skin contact absorption. An example of off gassing is the smell of a new car. If you've got a brand new car and you walk into the door of the car and you smell that new car smell, that's off gassing of the materials used in that car, generally plastic off gassing. Ingestion of plastic particles, as we heat our microwave dishes in the microwave out of plastic, we are migrating the plastic particles into our food and ingesting plastic particles. And skin contact absorption through the clothes that we wear. If we're wearing clothes that are made of plastic fiber, like nylon or polyester, there is an absorption of plastic particles through our skin. And plastics are ingested through drinking and food, and two primary types of plastics that are in the news a lot that really impact our bodies is PFAS and PFOs. And they're common additives to plastic food packaging, plastic food storage containers, and cookware. Like your nonstick frying pan. And both PFAS and PFOs have been found in the bloodstream of 98% of Americans in a blood test study of 15,000 Americans. Exposure has been linked to thyroid disorders, chronic kidney disease, liver disease, testicular cancer. And if you watch the movie Dark Waters, you'll see a lot more detailed information about PFAS and PFOs. I would also say that as I note the health harms, I have notes in my book. At the back of the book, I have more than 500 references of studies and quotes from people that have studied the impacts of plastic. Plastics are ingested through drinking food and food, and I mentioned a couple of examples earlier. PFOA is a polymer, which is a form of a plastic, and PFOAs are used as the additive surface in consumer and industrial products with the desired effect to repel water or oil. So think about how your clothing rejects water and repels water, like raincoats and boots. Carpets repel water. Non-stick frying pans are non-stick and repel water for a particular reason, and that's because PFOAs are included as a surfactant. Exposure has been linked to thyroid disorders, chronic kidney disease, liver disease, and testicular cancer. Of particular interest is black plastic, and I note that in our kitchen we had black plastic utensils for our cooking, and we just recently got rid of those, and we replaced them with silicone type of utensils. Recycled black plastics contain what is considered a toxic flame retardant, which is found in household electronics. And why is it in black plastics? Because black plastics is a recycled product from household electronics. And they often have toxic elements such as antimony, bromine, cadmium, mercury, and lead. I had a long and very enjoyable career in recycling, but I can tell you there are some negative effects to recycling, and that's one of them, recycling black plastics, because it's got these chemicals in it from the electronics that are not taken out of the process when recycled. Recycled black plastic is remanufactured in kitchen utensils, consumer toys, clothing, sports equipment, single-use packaging, and food trays. I see a lot of black food trays that are so-called microwavable as you warm up your food. And so not only are you migrating plastic particles into your food from those food trays, but also possibly these heavy toxic elements from the black plastics. And heat accelerates that transfer of chemicals to our food. Microplastics is in the news a lot, and microplastics also harms humans and the environment. Microplastics have been found in Mount Everest, in the deepest oceans, in Antarctica, everywhere on Earth. And microplastics is the fragmentation of plastics. That's the best way to look at it. Plastics do not decompose; they fragment down to smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. And microplastics ends up being the smallest particle that plastics can fragment down to, microplastics and nanoplastics. And microplastics are believed to migrate across the body membranes to the gastrointestinal tract, circulatory system, and lungs. Because of the small size, it can migrate through the skin layers. Human exposure to microplastics is through the ingestion of contaminated food, like I mentioned before, inhaling contaminated air, or skin absorption from contaminated surfaces, clothing, or abrasion. All of this leads, because of these health impacts, this leads me to the conversation of the precautionary principle of do no harm. And we generally think of the precautionary principle with the health industry and doctors and nurses of doing no harm to the body. What kind of harm are we doing to the body through plastics and plastics ingestion and so forth? And so I apply the principle of the precautionary principle to a framework that details public safety and public health. It encourages the pairing of protecting human health and the environment's safety where the risk may be high. Plastics are extremely harmful to human health, the environment, and climate change. And applying the do not harm precautionary principle would require eliminating plastics from our lives, which is the application of do no harm. Why are we harming ourselves with plastics? Going back to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, 180 countries are planning for zero fossil fuel by 2040 or 2050, different countries with different end dates. The United States is not one of them. There's 184 nations in the UN discussions on climate change, and there are 4 nations that are not planning for zero fossil fuel, but 180 countries are. And the obvious next step in going zero fossil fuel is to stop using plastics as we stop producing and utilizing fossil fuels. 12% of oil generated in the US is transformed into plastics, and 25% of frack gas is transformed into plastics. If we stop utilizing fossil fuels, it implies we must stop using plastics. And the global market value of plastics is forecast to grow substantially, up to $750 billion in 2027, based on current consumption rates. And the more plastics generated, the more harm they do. So going into a solutions format here, a bridge or series of bridges is necessary to move us toward replacing plastics. plastics are basically ubiquitous around us in every part of our lives. And more plastics equals more fossil fuel production, which equals more harm. And a series of systemic bridges is necessary to move us toward replacing plastics. And we've done this on an international scale twice before. So it's not an impossible task. From 1986 to 1921, all nations across the world banned lead-based vehicle fuels for our passenger cars and such. You might remember the lead versus unleaded gas pumps, or even might remember just leaded gas and before we had the choice of unleaded gas. And that was the transition period up until 2021. Now, after 2021, every ounce of gas sold for vehicle use is lead free. And that's because of the studies that show health impacts of lead from using it in vehicle fuels. And between 1987 and 2000, all nations banned chlorofluorocarbons utilized in refrigeration. Remember the ozone hole in the atmosphere and how the ozone hole was releasing more solar radiation than normal into our atmosphere and onto the surface of the earth, causing the higher rates of cancer. And nations band together and banned chlorofluorocarbons and found a safe replacement for the CFCs. And so if we've done it twice before, we can do it again through the replacement of plastics. So I have a 6-phase approach for systemic changes, and then I have 100 different activities that individuals can partake in to ban and replace plastics. The first phase of 6 phases is to ban new plastics production. There are more than 200 plastic facilities being constructed in the U.S. right now, not operational, but under construction. We need to stop the bleeding and stop the harm for future generations. And we need to promote the universal worldwide ban on producing new virgin plastics. This is being discussed at the Global Plastics Treaty conversations. The most recent treaty conversations did not yield an agreed upon treaty. They will meet again next year in 2026. And part of that discussion is banning the new production of plastics worldwide. And we need to support that effort. We also need to classify plastics as a hazardous waste pertaining to the international trade through the Basel Convention. The Basel Convention is an international trade agreement to protect human health and the environment against the adverse effects of hazardous waste. It essentially stops the shipment of hazardous waste on the open seas from country to country. The country of Canada has classified plastics as a hazardous waste pertaining to the Basel Convention. And many other countries, including the European Union, are now adopting that same principle that you cannot ship plastics around the world on the open seas because it is a hazardous waste that does harm the environment and human health and is restricted in transit by the Basel Convention. Phase 2 would be to reduce plastics consumption. Part of what's driving the industry to produce more and more plastics is consumer desires, so-called desires, our shopping habits, to consume more and more plastics. And we can reduce the consumption of plastics by starting to reduce our use of single-use plastics. I encourage you to start there, but not stop there. We go beyond single-use plastics to reduce unnecessary plastics in our lives. We can identify unnecessary plastics by simply looking around us in our homes, kitchen, living room, dining room, our offices and so forth. A plastic water bottle could be replaced with a stainless steel water bottle as you take a drink. So we can consider a plastic water bottle that is so-called reusable as an unnecessary plastic. We can consider a single-use plastic water bottle is absolutely unnecessary and part of the single-use plastics stream. And approximately 50% of all plastics generated each year have a lifespan of 1 day. Really, the definition of single use, a lifespan of less than 1 day. And approximately 50% of all plastics produced in the US has that short lifespan. We can reduce the use of our plastics and we at the same time stop the addiction to plastics. And as global plastic waste generation has doubled in 20 years from 2000 to 2019, and it is expected to double again. Phase 3 is reuse. Remember, reduce, reuse, recycle, the 3 Rs. The last slide was on reduction or reduce, and this slide's on reuse, and the next slide's on recycling. So the 3 Rs. And reuse is much higher priority. We can reuse cloth bags by replacing single-use plastic bags. We can replace the plastic dishware in our kitchen with washables, and washables are reusable. Replace single-use carryouts from restaurants with reusables. And my wife and I just converted to glass containers with a silicone lid as we go restaurant hopping, and take our leftovers back home. And it's once again a practice it's kind of like the cloth bags, making sure the cloth bags are in your car when you go to the grocery store. The same issue with the carryouts and the glass containers, putting it in the car before you head to the restaurant. And replacing bottled water with refillable containers. I mentioned that earlier. And don't forget repair clinics. Repair clinics are a great way to reuse our items rather than throwing them away and buying a new disposable item. And carbon dioxide emissions from disposable plastic and polystyrene cups are 3 to 10 times greater than those of reusable ceramic, stainless steel, and glass when compared over their life cycles. So even though we're washing and using water and energy to reuse, the actual carbon dioxide emissions from life cycle analysis is greater, far greater, with our disposable plastics. And phase 4, recycle existing flows of plastics. Recycle existing plastics, avoid new production. Only 9% of all plastics produced is recycled. That's a true statistic. I've been in recycling 45 years. I know what plastics get recycled and what doesn't. And if we maximize our capacity to recycle the plastics that are being produced, our maximum capacity would be 15%. Why so low? Think about all the plastics that's in your lives. The plastic carpet that you're walking on is not recyclable. The plastic lampshade is not recyclable. The plastic Christmas light bulbs, those miniature light bulbs that are plastic, are not recyclable. The sheets, the polyester sheets on your bed are not recyclable. And so there's plastics everywhere in our lives, yet only 9% that is produced actually gets recycled. And one bit of advice I add is do not wish recycle, follow the MRF standards. So MRF is a material recovery facility in the Cincinnati area. That's Rumpke. And as the processor of recyclables, Rumpke has a list of recyclable plastics. And if we add in non-recyclable plastic and say, oh, I wish they would recycle it, I put it in the bin and they'll be forced to recycle it. And that system does not work, because what happens is those non-recyclable plastics gets pulled out at an expense by the MRF operator and sent to the landfill. So it's an elaborate way to send those plastics to the landfill. Wish recycling is not a good idea. And if you're looking for recycled plastics that you might acquire and use in your life, I recommend recycling ocean recovered plastics. The amount of plastics in our oceans is absolutely horrendous and growing each day. And there are 3 companies there that are working to recover those plastics, take them out of the ocean, and make new products out of them. And I welcome your thoughts on that there. My point is to avoid the creation of new plastic from oil and gas and recycle what we can right now. And some resources, Earth 911 and Hamilton County Recycling Database. Phase 5 of 6 phases, we need to introduce plastic substitutes. And even though this is phase 1, we need to be working on this in phase 1, at phase 1 instead of phase 5. I mean, all through these phases, we need to be working on plastic substitutes. And research and development is necessary there. Currently, on most of our single-use plastics, there is a reasonable, safe substitute to use right now in today's marketplace. But when you get beyond single-use plastics to hard, rigid plastics to more durable plastics, it's hard to find safe substitutes. And I promote the substitution of plastics that are environmentally safe and non-toxic to human health. So we don't want to move into a situation where the substitute is more harmful than the original material. We can work toward a future where all plastics are replaced with safe substitutes, but we're not quite there yet. We need to work with our industries. And I believe there's significant business opportunities out there to expand replacement products, utilizing materials that substitute for plastics. And that will take a bit of creativity and entrepreneurial spirit there. Phase 6 of 6 phases is the phase out of all existing production of plastics. Phase 1 was phasing out newly proposed existing production facilities. Phase 6 is phasing out all existing production of plastics and eliminating the production of all plastics. We can do so if we have safe substitutes out there and consumers embrace those safe substitutes. And I believe there's an existential threat of climate change that drives the need to shut down new proposed plants and existing plastic production plants based on carbon dioxide and methane emissions and human harm. And I emphasize that human harm there. From the moment of creation to the infinite lifespan of each plastic product, continuous environmental impacts are unmitigated and infinitely ongoing. And the choice that's before us that we often don't think about, the choice is, can we save the earth or continue using the plastics? I believe it's an either or question right there. So the bridge to phase out plastics simply is the 6 phases: ban new production, reduce plastic consumption, reuse recovered plastics, recycle existing flows of plastic, introduce plastic substitutes all the way through, up through phase 1, and phase out all existing production of plastics. And that migrates us into the conversation of what you can do as individuals. Some of those phases are institutional changes. Some of those are actions that can be taken place by individuals. They may seem like big steps, but we need to have those conversations worldwide. What I'd like to display, and I have in my book, about 100 actions that individuals can take to address this plastic pollution problem. And a few examples are on this slide. On plastic reduction, of course, we can eliminate the straws and the single-use plastic bags. I mentioned that earlier. And take reusable containers to restaurants for leftovers. From plastic substitutes perspective, shop smart. Look for plastic-free alternatives. And avoid regrettable substitutes for plastic. And I mentioned that earlier, that we don't want a substitute that's more harmful than plastics. And that's called a regrettable substitute. An example of a plastic-free alternative, I went to the grocery store a couple months ago looking for raisins, and there's 2 types of raisins side by side, one in a container that's plastic and one in a container that's paperboard. And I took the container that is paperboard. That's a safe substitute. No chemicals are migrating into your food, and it is a recyclable. Paperboard containers are recyclable. So it's a good plastic-free alternative, and that's what we need to be looking for. I'm looking at jelly and peanut butter in plastic containers, and I'm looking for glass jars there. Same thing with mayonnaise and other condiments. I'm looking for glass containers to replace what is now plastic. And it wasn't that long ago, 30 years ago, that those containers were glass. So it was a reasonable container at that time. It is a reasonable container today too. Um, I encourage individuals to do a room by room assessment. I describe this in my book, and I should note, I should have noted earlier in the PowerPoint that down on the bottom right hand corner are page references, and those are page numbers that I'm referencing from my book. And all the slides have those page numbers. I forgot to mention that earlier. Um, but room by room assessment, you start with the kitchen. That's where the human health hazards are the greatest, particularly in the cooking instruments and utensils and so forth, and storage dishes and so forth. Um, and that is also an easy place to start. There are plastic free alternatives for everything that's in the kitchen that's plastic. And so replacing the plastic when possible through an assessment of each room. I note the kitchen, but also look at the living room, dining room, bedroom, office, den, all your electronics. I mean, there's plastics everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Your play toys, everything, and it's time to kind of look for safe alternatives. And my point on individual actions is one green step. This is what I'd like you to remember most importantly throughout the whole PowerPoint is that you are empowered to take one green step at a time. And after the first replacement, move on to the second green step. This can be an overwhelming topic if you want to tackle a whole lot of stuff all at once. And so I recommend one green step, achieve that green step, and then move on to the next green step. And it becomes a common practice when you do your shopping, but it takes the initiative to take that first green step. Those were individual actions that I was noting. Here are some collective actions that we can work together on as a group. In your community, you can educate your community through local groups, faith groups, and environmental groups. You can work on communicating that wish recycling is not a good idea, and you can arrange tours of the local recycling MRF and learn about wish recycling and what is recyclable and what isn't. That's a great first green step right there. And educate yourself in your community on the local, state, and federal legislative actions regarding plastics and write to your representatives for action. Sometimes we feel paralyzed in the current legislative environment, but I always continue to say, write to your legislatures, your senators, representatives at the state level and at the federal level. I also note that emails can work, but more effectively is written letters. If you write a letter and it's not a form letter and you send it to your legislature, it's likely to be read and it will have an impact. I also encourage you to participate in Plastics Free July. This is a great international effort, and look for this website on the internet called Plastics Free July. They give you lots of suggestions on how to live free from plastics. And it's 1 month out of the year. I encourage you to go beyond July and do it every month of the year. But this is a great first step, is to join hundreds of thousands of other people each year on Plastics Free July. This is a great starting point. And of note, the American Medical Association adopted a policy declaring climate change a public health crisis. And I believe that we need to communicate this policy to your local health department. Your local health department may be unaware that it's a public health crisis. And there's a lot of, as I noted, a lot of health impacts of plastics. And finally, as a collective action, write to packaging and brand companies to change their plastic packaging to a reuse or recycling format. One letter, I don't know if that's going to make a difference, but if you have a community, a group community that's sending 25 letters, 30 letters to a branded company and saying you need to change this plastic format to a glass format or a safer substitute, they'll listen. If they're getting letters from their consumers, they'll listen. May not be an easy change for them, but I believe that collective action does have impacts. And on the national level, national actions, and I include international actions there, Support the Global Plastic Treaty. Write to your U.S. senators and representatives to fully support the Global Plastic Treaty. Much of our Senate and representatives do not support the Global Plastics Treaty. They need to hear from us. They're not there yet. They need to hear why we support it, and petition to reinstate and expand the single-use ban on all federally owned properties. Um, there was an initiative in 2023 and 24 to rid single-use plastics in all national parks, and that's now being reversed. And I think we need to petition to reinstate that ban, that single-use plastics ban in our national parks and all federally owned properties. Petition the federal government to use its large purchasing power to use recyclables and reusables. Moving to a reusable format will reduce plastic consumption significantly, and the federal government has a large purchasing power platform. Call for the end of national fossil fuel tax subsidies. Fossil fuel companies often have land rights that cost them nothing. In the state of Ohio, fracking companies can enter into state parks and frack for gas in state parks at no cost of land acquisition whatsoever. That's a tax subsidy. Our taxpayers, like ourselves, are paying for that. And why should we subsidize the fossil fuel industry so much? So write to U.S. senators and U.S. representatives to fully adopt the Basel Convention. The U.S. is one nation out of 4 nations that have not adopted the Basel Convention. And it should include the mention of plastics as a hazardous waste, and support federal legislation to ban marine plastic litter. It is amazing. In my research for my book, I was amazed at how much plastic is discharged into the oceans by the fishing industries. And that's something that needs to stop right there. That is a direct disposal method of plastics into the oceans. And call for denying permits for new and expanded plastic production facilities. There's 27 different plants proposed along the Ohio River. Some of them are getting stopped in their opening day. They're not reaching their opening day because of citizen objections. And your voice does matter there. I'm closing in on the conclusion, and I want to end. My book ends with hope and act as a chapter, and I want to end with some hope and act thoughts to lead you into action. It is not hopeless. There is hope for the future, but it takes our action, and that's my point in my book. There a quote from Greta Thunberg. There is hope. I've seen it, but it does not come from the governments or corporations. It comes from the people. And I do believe in people power as she speaks there. Pope Francis stated, we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And we remember that plastics industries harm poor communities. Think about New Orleans and other areas where plastic plants are being sited. The true servants of the most compassionate are those who walk on the earth humbly, from the Holy Quorum. That speaks volumes to me, that we should live a more humble lifespan, a lifestyle that does not harm our common home. We and the earth are one, from Thich Nhat Hanh. That is a great philosophy to live with, is that we are in unison and part of the earth, and we shall not harm the earth. And finally, I ask that you reduce your plastic footprint, walk lightly on the earth, our common home. And so I conclude with the promotion of my book, the Untangling Plastics, and state that the great plastic awakening must happen now. So I am open to questions now.
Bob, I had a question.
Yes.
Where does the chemical recycling stand today, where you convert the plastic into the monomer and then you can make anything out of it? Um,
That is a growing conversation in the plastics world. We can solve our plastic pollution by chemical recycling, sometimes called advanced recycling, and that brings the plastics down to its original components. The problem there's a couple problems I have with chemical recycling. One, it still contains the chemical additives and the harm that plastics do to the environment. Even if you're creating a new plastic product out of it, you're still generating microplastics and additional harms as it has contact with the earth and with humans. So no matter what product is produced through chemical recycling, you're adding more harm to the earth. And the second problem I have with chemical recycling is the tremendous amount of energy and that is utilized to create new plastics out of it. It's an energy consumption, and sometimes that energy is carbon dioxide and methane emissions from the plant. Sometimes they have more closed loop systems to try to eliminate air pollutants, but nonetheless, it is still a very high energy activity. And I don't know of any chemical recycling plant that is economically and financially viable. It's a futuristic conversation, and I think that it proposes more harm than good.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, go for it.
Yeah, um, even if we stop production of plastics tomorrow, we've still got tons of plastic around us. And every so often I hear reports of research on microbial degradation of
Yes.
plastic. Do you have any updates on where that might be at the
Yeah.
moment?
You got 2 points there, and I can address both. But if you stop production of plastics right now, there is hundreds of millions of tons of plastics circulating around the earth right now, and it will take a while to get rid of that plastic. And that's why I propose the 6 phases, not only eliminating the production, but also our reduction in use, our reuse of plastics, and our recycling of plastics until we run out of those plastics. But more importantly, seeking safe substitutes, that's from the 6 phases. When you're talking about microbial solutions, and I always welcome scientific inventions and scientific approaches. I have a science background, and I welcome that. But sometimes we get false hopes from different approaches. And microbial breakdown of plastics does not break down it through a decomposition process. It breaks it down into microplastics. So and sometimes in many of those cases down to nanoplastics, which are even smaller pieces than microplastics. And to describe nanoplastics and microplastics, they're smaller than the thickness of a human hair, and you can't even see microplastics or nanoplastics. It's the final fragmentation process of plastics breaking down. So when a promising scientific experiment says it breaks down plastics, it's referring to fragmentation. It's not referring to degrading the plastic down to its original elements. And we also have to remember the original elements of plastic is gas and oil. That's the original element of plastics, plus all the chemical additives that are added to it. So we have the complication of the chemical additives, but as the material breaks down, if you want to depolymerize the plastics down to its original elements, you're talking gas and oil. What are you going to do with that gas and oil? You could put it in a truck and burn it, and then you got carbon dioxide and methane. So it's a cycle of damaging harm to the climate, to the earth, and to the human lives. That's my point there.
Well, thank you.
Bob, I have a question.
Yes.
So I heard a Science Friday episode recently where somebody was talking about his new book on trash, and he came right out and said, It was called Waste Wars, the wild afterlife of your trash. He came right out and said the most important thing we can do with existing plastic is throw it in the garbage, never ever recycle it. Of course, everything else you've said about we have to stop using it, stop the supply of it. But for the plastic that we have in our hands today in our kitchen, put it in the garbage. And he said exactly for those reasons. Yeah, any sort of chemical recycling is terrible. And half the time the recycling goes to some other country where they don't know what to do with it and ends up in the ocean anyway. And he was just saying, put it in the garbage. It'll make you feel guilty. And that's a good thing. It's better than that kind of false hope that you were talking about. And as we feel more and more guilty, and as that garbage piles up in a landfill where it's, kind of buried and protected and not floating around in the environment, maybe we'll all wake up and do the right thing. What are your thoughts about that?
I heard that Science Friday episode myself, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I was nodding my head in agreement throughout his entire conversation. So
really,
there's a difficult part of that conversation. You described what he said very accurately. I appreciate that. but as I was in the recycling industry for 45 years, the one thing that I did throughout my 45-year career is slam landfills as evil agents. And they're landfills are not inert. They're designed to be tombs where you put something in and it doesn't impact earth, it doesn't impact air, water, or anything, but it does. It's not inert. Landfills have fissures. Landfills have leakages to the water table. Landfills have a lot of problems to them. So I'm pretty anti-landfill. However, his argument was convincing to me.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why I agreed with them, and I have with 45-year career in recycling, I have a hard time even saying the word.
I know. Yeah.
I just can't say it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, he had a very effective argument that if you are putting it into a landfill, you're limiting the harm that plastics exhibits in human life and climate change and on the earth, and you're creating a guilt trip on your pattern of consumption. And you might look more carefully at your consumption patterns if that material actually ends up in the landfill, and your landfills start filling faster. And I agree with him on that point. I do. But I still have a hard time saying put it in a landfill.
Yeah, I know. Thank you.
Bob, can I ask something?
Yes, go for it.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your informative presentation. And about the Recycling and Reuse Hub, which, we're happily going down and getting rid of all this stuff. But then I felt very bad to see how much I had. So I think you're bringing up this question of this great grassroots effort. And they say they know where everything is being recycled, but still I'm hearing the problem of, how things are recycled.
Yeah, I support the Reuse Hub in Cincinnati on Evans Street. And I do visit there about once a month. I do have a problem with the false promise that everything that is delivered there can be recycled. And they do. I don't criticize the management of the hub. They're doing everything they can to find homes, and the homes are generally recyclers. Some of the plastics ends up in Houston, Texas, because there's no local market. And that's why Rumpke won't collect it, because there's no local market. So they ship as far away as Houston, Texas. I'm thinking about truck emissions from Cincinnati to Houston, Texas. And I'm thinking there's an impact there on the earth right there. And so I'm thinking that what the hub is doing is a good public service on handling our unwanted plastics, but it's also creating the illusion that we're doing a good thing and we don't have to do anything more. And I would argue that is a temporary action until we find safe substitutes. And we really need to be out there as consumers looking for replacements to the plastics we're generating. Take a look at the plastics you're taking to the hub and saying, where are these plastics being generated in my household? I'll bet at least half, if not more, are coming from the kitchen. And if those plastics are used for food preparation, you're consuming plastic particles and chemical additives in your food. And so it's best to kind of look at what you're taking to the hub and start looking for safe replacements.
Thank you. And I think they could educate people on what you're saying, the
Yes.
problem of plastic. I think that would be a helpful thing.
Another note on the hub, and I do support the hub. I also donate money there too. The hub is changing from a free format to a fee-based format beginning January 1st. And the reason why they're going to be charging $10 a month for the use of their facility is because most of the plastics they recycle do not generate revenues to pay for their staff and their operations. And so it's a loss leader. They're losing money, and they're financially in need of support, financial support from their users as a user fee. I don't object to that user fee, but it is raising the red flag. Are we doing the right thing in trying to recycle plastics that are not financially viable in the recycling pathways?
Thank you.
Bob, there was one comment from
Yes.
Susan Abrams that there is a debate about whether silicone is really a safer material than other kinds of plastic. Foil may be a better choice.
Silicone is a good topic. I kind of address it in my book. Silicone is not a plastic. It's silica in its basic form, and it generally is a safe substitute for plastics, except, and here's where the exception becomes a complication. Sometimes silicone products are coated with plasticizers, just as plastics are, to make it flexible and sealable on a container. And, it gives us the qualities that we're seeking out of the silicone material. A silicone without plasticizers is very rigid product. It's very rigid material. And if your silicone is flexible, that means it's got plasticizers on it. And so then if you're using silicone, you don't put it into, if it's a moldable, flexible silicone, you don't put it in contact with food. So I consider silicone a small bridge away from black plastics and other harmful plastics while we look for a safer substitute. And I don't believe silicone is a fully safe product, but it's better than what we're replacing. And so I consider it a bridge. I consider it a temporary answer while we look for safer substitutes.
Thank you.
And I think I had a question from Jeffrey.
Yeah, Bob, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks, Connie, for referencing Science Friday. I hadn't heard that episode. I'll go back and listen to it. And I think that's a double-edged message there, because for those few but growing number of us who are concerned about the environment and recycling, it may start us thinking about the reality of the possibility of just throwing it away and feeling more and more guilty and reverting to glass and metal for storage. But for the vast majority of them who care not, advising everybody in the world to just throw it away might be worse than what we're trying already.
Yep.
Anyway,
Yep.
And I also wanted to point out that there are two words in the hub's name. It's recycling and reuse. And we heard an excellent presentation in Kennedy Heights Center recently from the director of the hub, who reiterated that their entire upper floor is dedicated to reuse and can be visited for all kinds of materials that could be used by people that they don't recycle. automatically for different reasons.
Excellent point.
Just the next simple example, egg cartons.
Yeah.
Farmers come in and get those egg cartons, so they don't have to pay for them to put the eggs in. So anyway, yeah, thanks everybody. Great presentation, Bob. Thank you.
Yeah, and a note on the reuse side of the hub. I visit that fourth floor whenever I can, and I note as you go through the room by room assessment, you might know that you have plastic hangers for your clothes, and they can be replaced with metal hangers. Remember the old metal hangers? And the reuse hub has metal hangers, and they have wood hangers too, and so taking advantage of the reuse hub and reusing some of the items that have been donated there, you can start to replace some of the plastics in your house.
Thank you so much, Bob. If anybody else has a question, please go ahead now, or we can wrap up with one more question I have for Bob. Does anyone have any more questions? Okay, so Bob, before I ask you for your final thoughts to send us home with for all our audience here and for all of us, I wanted to thank FCGG, especially Joanne, who literally is the heart and soul of FCGG. She's here today. She's the founder of Faith Communities Go Green, and she is the one person who has dedicated her life in the last 5 years to the work that we are doing through Faith Communities Go Green. I also want to thank the entire leadership team of Faith Communities Go Green. I want to thank Fred, my husband, for putting all the notes in the chat. And we promise you that we will be sending the toolkit to everyone who registered for today's program. Even though you may have downloaded it right now, it still misses the link to this recording that we will be converting to a Google link and putting it in the toolkit. We will also include Bob's presentation, because I was noting, even for my own use, Bob, you've so conveniently put the page numbers on those slides, so it's so easy and user friendly. So thank you for letting us use your presentation in the toolkit. And thank you all of you for being here and encouraging Faith Communities Go Green to produce these kind of programs, for encouraging people like Bob to continue doing the great work he is doing to serve our planet. Bob, thank you so much. What an honor to hear you. It was a pleasure to see your presentation, and we've learned so much, a lot of new things that, thought-provoking things that really is going to make us think twice before we go back to our old habits. Bob, I have one final question for you. That do you have some thoughts for our guests here today, your final closing thoughts and wisdom that you would like to share with us, which will stay with us forever, inspiring us in our life's journey to make this transformation in our lives, where it is natural and effortless for us to live such a life where our thoughts, words, and deeds, our thoughts, words, and actions are all aligned with a harmonious, sustainable, and a healthy world?
Yeah, and first, I want to thank you for the invitation to present to all of you, and I thank you all for your attendance and your questions. I very much enjoyed the question and answer period there. Final thoughts. As presented in my book, at the beginning of numerous chapters, I reference my grandfather. And I believe that we can learn from our past generations to protect our future generations. That's a thought that was driving it in my heart when I wrote the book. And that is my grandfather. He graced my life by introducing me to nature on a family farm. And to protect and embrace nature. Not only was there a family farm, but there was a backwoods behind there that we would walk in the woods, we would walk the farm together. And I very much enjoyed some of his wise thoughts there. And one of the thoughts that he presented to me was waste not, want not. A frugal lifestyle that's modeled after nature, and the thought that that nature has it right, but when we synthesize and create plastics or anything that's non-nature oriented, we tend to stray from that philosophy of waste not, want not. And our native ancestors taught us the ethic of do no harm to the earth. And I have a whole chapter dedicated to do no harm. That's a basic philosophy from our land ancestors from America. And my grandfather, before he died, he passed away in '86, but before he passed, he was noting that the spring seasons were arriving sooner, the summers were hotter, and that was not good news for the farmers, but that was not good news for the plants, the animals, the birds, the migration of diseases. He had that foresight in the early '80s, before we started talking about climate change as we are now today. So my question that I lead you with is can we protect the earth for future generations, utilizing some of the wisdom from past generations? And I have one final quote. I had some quotes in my PowerPoint. I have one final quote to leave you with. This is from Madruru, Aboriginal, speaking. Our spirituality is a oneness and an interconnectedness with all that lives and breathes, even with all that does not live or breathe. Speaking about all of creation, and we're all interconnected. And I leave you with that thought.
Excellent, excellent. And a lot of our programs this year have been on the interconnectivity of all life in this universe, even non-life. So
Yes.
thank you so much for these wonderful, inspiring thoughts that have reached our hearts through your presentation, through your book, Bob, and to everyone present here today. I will say goodbye to you for this year. We will see you again in 2026 with a series of new programs through Faith Communities Go Green. And as Bob said, we wish you all one green step at a time. And that's something that'll stick in my mind forever, Bob. One green step at a time, achieve it, and then move on to the next. What a great, simple thing, but we will follow it. Thank you.
Yeah, don't be overwhelmed. One green step gets you there, and then go on to the second step. Yep.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful, safe, peaceful holiday season with all your friends and family. Bob, thank you once again. We're so grateful, and a very happy holiday season to you as well.
Thank you all.
Stay well, everybody.
Stay well. Bye-bye.